Liberal Democrat spokesperson Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to welcome this bill back to the House of Commons some 15 months, I think, after it started its passage at the start of last year. And I'm extremely disappointed how little time the government has made, actually, to discuss the many Lords' amendments. I'm very grateful to our colleagues at the other place for their diligence on this bill and for seeking to strengthen and improve it through the time that they had with this bill. I'm only disappointed the government is throwing so many of those amendments out today. So let me start, Madam Deputy Speaker, with Lords' Amendments 41 and 42, tabled by my noble friend, the Lord Mohammed of Tinsley, in the other place. This would seek to introduce a price cap on the amount of branded uniform a school can require parents to buy. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know the price of uniform causes real hardship for families, particularly in the midst of a cost of living crisis. It often causes genuine anxiety, as we've just heard from the chair of the Select Committee, sometimes children being sent home for wearing the wrong item of uniform, disrupting their learning as a result. So whilst we strongly support the government's intention with a branded uniform item cap, I would implore the Minister to look again at the detail. Liberal Democrats have proposed a uniform price cap, which would keep the prices down for parents, while giving schools the flexibility to choose their own their own uniform policy and how many branded items they wish to include. The Minister talked about perverse incentives and driving up prices for parents. Actually, a monetary cap would do precisely the opposite, because you would be using the market and incentivising suppliers to drive down their prices if there is a monetary cap in place, because obviously they want to be able to sell more items of branded clothing within that cap.
Absolutely right.
And I appreciate that the government points to its manifesto commitment, but there's nothing shameful about changing one's mind. Dare I say, U-turning, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the evidence demands it. That's something this government should feel pretty comfortable with by now. On the theme of supporting families, I turn to Lord's Amendment 16, which would require the government to review the per-child funding in the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund following the devastating cuts they implemented last year. This fund provides therapeutic support for some of the most vulnerable children in our society, Madam Deputy Speaker. It allows them to process their trauma and relearn how to trust. Last year's cuts means that many adoptive parents and kinship carers can barely afford to pay for needs assessments, never mind the complex therapy their child actually requires. Many of these adoptive parents and kinship carers have written to me from across the country about their experiences since the government cut their entitlements, and heartbreakingly, many of them have talked about the threat of adoption breakdown looming over their family. This fund is a lifeline for families, but that lifeline is fraying. We're told that tough choices must be made, but the Department of Education's advertising budget hit nearly £50 million last year. That's a £15 million increase in the last 2 years. Just halving that budget could restore crucial therapeutic support to thousands of children. So I ask the Minister, will she support our amendment to review the funding for the ASGSF and commit to restoring individual grants? Or is this government more interested in glossy advertising campaigns than supporting its most vulnerable children? And speaking of vulnerable children, I'd like to turn to Lord's Amendment 17, tabled by the noble Baroness Tyler in the other place, who has done amazing work on the issue of sibling contact rights. This seeks to close a loophole in current regulations so that siblings, when one is in care and the other is not, are able to remain in contact. The amendment would require a child's care plan to include arrangements for promoting contact with all their siblings, whether they're in care or not, as far as that is consistent with the child's welfare. The government has said that there is no need to close this loophole as the duty already exists, but I ask the benches opposite whether they can be content with such an answer when it is clear the system at present is not working. And we've heard again from the Chair of the Education Select Committee and the Honourable Member for Great Grimsby about the importance of this issue. I did have permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, to share Abby's story. Abby was somebody who grew up in a residential care home and lost contact with two of her sisters, contact which was subsequently restored, but I don't have time to go into that now because we've been so limited today in debate. But I hope we will return to this again if the government insists on doing the wrong thing and throwing out this really important amendment that clearly a number of their backbenchers support. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to address the government's motion on in lieu of Lord's Amendments 37 and 38 that further amends the UK GDPR legislation to tighten control over children's personal data online. Liberal Democrats have been calling for this change for over a year now, and so while we welcome the government copying another one of our proposals, simply granting themselves the power to do something at some point is no protection for children until they act, and action has not been forthcoming. And this is true for the second part of the government's motion. Again, we have another consultation that appears to be dithering over whether something should be done at all. We have been very clear on these benches with the government. If they want our support, they must make a firm commitment to act and to act quickly. Liberal Democrats are calling for a specific implementation timeline and a change to the consultation's terms of reference so that it does actually become a question of how we regulate social media, not if. And we have a thought-out policy ready to go if the government wants to take another idea of ours. We've proposed a harms-based approach to online regulation by age-rating user-to-user services by the addictiveness of their features, the harmfulness of their content and the impact on mental health. The solution is practical, future-proof, and would provide the incentive to make the online world safer for us all. Unlike the government, our approach ensures that these sweeping powers are not concentrated in the hands of a single Secretary of State. So I must ask, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the government truly comfortable bypassing full parliamentary scrutiny through secondary legislation? They must consider the precedent they're setting. We are handing a loaded gun to any future administration of any political complexion to decide which websites are harmful and which aren't. For the sake of our children's safety and our democratic standards, I urge the government to think again. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we made a promise on these benches to the campaigners, to the charities, to the thousands of parents who have written to us that we would not play party politics on this issue. And so while we may differ in our approach, we will oppose the removal of Lord's Amendment 38 because we need the government to hear the voices of thousands of parents and children who are desperate for something to change. Madam Deputy Speaker, every hour this House spends debating if we should do something, another algorithm is being developed to exploit a vulnerable child. By opposing the removal of this amendment, we are sending a clear message that the safety of our children is a non-negotiable right.